During World War I think, the military needed mules. So instead of the military going out and getting 2 or 3 from each farmer, Mr. Hansen would go around and he would purchase mules, and 3 miles south of town had a barn built, and they would store the mules there until he'd get about 100, and then the military would come and take them all at one time. Well, then when the war ended, Mr. Hansen got stuck with, I don't know, it was like 60 or 70 mules. So it's like, what do I do with mules? So that hence started the road construction, which was a very big deal in this area because at that time there were no roads and bridges. And I mean, if you told him the community needed something, he came up with it and did it.
We ran the lumber yard too. There was one guy was on the other. It had a kind of a divided driveway. You drove up in there if you wanted it, and so there was one guy that worked for the road part, but he had his office on the other side of the drive, and we were on one side of the drive. But we just, and anybody wanted anything, why they either helped themselves or some of our guys went out and helped load up their things. So we handled veterinary supplies. We had those in the basement over to the office, and they always had to get those out too, that they wanted them. And
Mr. Hansen was one of our customers. He had Hansen, while he had Hansen Lumber, he also had Hansen Construction, and which was, they didn't do dirt work, but back in those days, asphalt was cold mix. And he owned most of the areas or had a leash all around the country on sand pits because they had to have sand in order to make asphalt.
Sitting at his desk, and that is reconstructed in the Hansen Museum, and I go there and I bring back memory to sit there in front of him. And Mr. Hansen, he would first take a piece of paper and write your name at the top and say, "Now, what are we doing today?" And I would say, "Well, Mr. Hansen, I have brought you an idea for a well. Well, let's look at it." So my map would go to him. He would look over his glasses and look at it and look at it and look at it. And he'd say, "Well, let me see." He would reach behind him and pull a map, big, long map, out of a barrel of maps and unroll it and lay my map on top of his map. And then he would look at it. And finally, the first time I remember, he looked at me and said, "I don't think much of your deal." I said, "Well, appreciate you looking at it anyway." He said, "Well, by the way, let's not," he said, "who owns this acreage around this?" And I said, "Well, I do." He said, "What'd you pay for it?" And I said, back then it wasn't much. I said, "Probably 50 cents an acre, maybe $1 an acre for the lease." And he would say, "Well, now, let's see." He said, "If I took this piece, this dry hole piece, and then I took this piece and this piece and this piece and this piece and gave you $1 an acre for it, and no overriding royalty, just B, then I might do it." Well, of course, I had no chance. No, I didn't have any other opportunity. And I said, "Well, that'll be fine." He said, "Okay, here's what I'll do. I'll take this piece here and give you a letter for $2,500 support money. But I want this piece, this piece, and this piece." And I said, "Okay." He said, "Who are you going to sell that other direct offset to?" And I said, "I don't have any idea." He said, "Well, in about 3 or 4 days or a week, I want you to call this man." And he wrote down a name on a piece of paper and handed him. And the name was Nathan Appleman. I said, "I don't have any idea who he is." He said, "Well, he's a gentleman that lives in New York City." And he said, "You call him and tell him that I bought this offset, and you're showing him the other one." Well, I had a suspicion that the deal was probably made with him, which it was. I'd call Mr. Appleman, and he was a very nice gentleman. He'd say, "Well, Mr. Hansen asked me to look at this." He said, "You know, he doesn't think much of your deal." So I said, "Well, you don't have to do this." He said, "Well, since Mr. Hansen's doing it, I'll buy that other piece." So somehow we got that done.
He had a lot of oil and got involved in that. And of course, we sold him some belts and shivs and stuff like that, as well as when for asphalt, they had all kinds of trucks and equipment and the like, and we sold them parts. I don't think they ever bought any new equipment. They they would spend more money repairing them than they could have bought new ones for sometimes, but they did. He was very frugal with that. He was an excellent businessman, and he flat loved Western Kansas.